now that I'm ready to go ahead and get started printing, this is the palette knife. We will potentially have some containers set up for you. Look how sticky, I don't know that you can see that from that far away, but the ink is really sticky. You don't need to use a ton of it. It goes a long way. When you apply it to your palette, you want to place it just an inch below the top or just a tiny bit more than that. Okay, and you're going to try and spread it along the top, just about the width of your. Then we'll use this ink extender. Just going to put 2 drops, just a tiny bit more ink. And now I'm going to mix. You have to mix that extender in. So as you're mixing, I kind of use like the bottom of this palette knife to kind of scoop it and then slowly push it flat. Kind of like you're applying frosting onto something. Pretty well mixed. Now I'm going to try and get it back up at the top to where I had it when I started. And I'm trying to make just this little bead of ink. So that way it's all just kind of in this one row or column. Leave your palette knife kind of set on top of here so that way you don't get any ink on the table. Then your brayer, you're just gently going to touch that column of ink. See how it's just touched right there? And then you're going to start rolling over here. And when I roll, I pick up the roller. So that way you're evenly moving the ink around on the roller. You'll hear that kind of tacky, sticky sound. And that's a good sign that you have a nice layer of ink. See how this is a really thin, it's like paper thin layer of ink. If you have more than that, it's going to be too much and it'll get into the cracks on your linoleum. This first time, inking up the roller will take longer than others. And same with inking up your block. The first time always takes longer. Okay, so this is nice because your block has a base to it, so it's raised off the table. You won't get as much ink in other places. All right, as you're rolling the ink on here, do the same thing, like roll it and you pick it up. Roll it, pick it up. You can go opposite directions to help ensure that you're getting full coverage. And then you go back to your ink and roll it up again on the brayer. It might look like there's enough ink on here just because it's turned black, but I assure you there's not quite enough. You need to do this a few different times. You're trying to build up a few layers of ink on here, just like we built up layers of ink on the plate. And make sure you're covering it. See how when I roll across here, it doesn't quite cover the whole edge. So then I go back and I roll over that section too. See how you can, I don't know if you can hear it or not on the video, but it's kind of starting to give that tacky sound on my plate. Or sorry, on this block. You can call it a plate as well. That means that there's enough ink on there. All right, first you're just going to use practice paper, okay, just so you can get an idea if your block has enough ink or maybe you see changes that you might want to make. Okay, so you're going to set your paper down and then you're going to grab your block and you're going to think of how you can center this block on the paper as much as possible. You don't want it too far off to the right or left or top or bottom. You want to try and get it in the center of the paper. Okay, so I've set it there. Now you cannot rub just the back of the block. It's not going to do anything. This is padded right here so that way you can rub the linoleum and it gives a nice pressure on the linoleum. Okay, so you're going to touch the back of your plate and pinch your paper. Slowly guide it to the edge of your table and pinch your block and paper together. So it's like this. Then you're going to turn it over. Okay. Now I've just kind of gently rubbed it with my hands to make sure the ink has secured the paper to the block. Then you're going to take the baren And you have one hand on the paper here to support it from sliding, and then your other hand is holding the baren. And once you apply it to the page or the paper, you don't push really hard. You're just gently setting it on there, and you're basically rubbing little circles. You're going to keep this turning in a circular motion. I feel like I've kind of rubbed the top, so I want to turn this a little bit. Rub that other side. I don't think I got my paper very centered, but that's okay. This is just a test print. Alright, I feel like that's pretty good. We could actually kind of see all the ink that is soaked into the paper. Now I would suggest placing one hand down here and one hand or fingers pinching the corner. Slowly lift up. Okay, now we can take a look at the print. It looks quite a bit different, right? It's just quite a bit different next to the block, but you can really see those strong whites and blacks. So now I'm going to kind of look over my print, see if there's anything that I want to change. If there's anything you decide you want to change, you can rinse off your block or just take more test paper and print it a couple more times, and that should dry the ink out off of your block. So I did find a couple little areas that I wanted to carve a little more. So again, if you do that, you have to brush off your block. I know there's a couple little pieces. They like to stick to the ink after, if you've recently printed. If you decide to carve, and I took a couple of prints off of this just to take the ink off, there's still going to be some on there. So take a piece of paper and you can just place it on here and then carve. That way you don't have to get as much ink on your hand here. Okay, let's do this again. So I am going to do another test print before I put it on the final paper. So we'll have to ink up the roller again. All right, good. So what you're looking for here is solid ink coverage. It's a little bit lighter up here, so I know to go a little heavier on the ink when I roll it out this time. And there it is. So this paper, since it is just a little bit thicker, it doesn't absorb the ink quite as well. So I know this next print that I do, I'm going to need to use a little bit more ink. I just realized on my print, remember there were little pieces of linoleum I was trying to get off of there. That's a piece of linoleum that stuck to my block. So I noticed because this cloud didn't transfer very well, it's because that piece of linoleum is still stuck on my block. So I'll remove that before I do my next print. Okay, I've done my second print. Added a little more ink this time. A little better ink coverage than the first one. Okay, so you might have to print a few times in order to get a solid black. Like this would be the solid black here. That's what we're looking for. So you'll want to have several different pieces of paper with you. It doesn't take very long to make one print. Remember, you need 3 total prints that have a nice solid black to turn in for this assignment. We do also have a small printing press to use. So again, I have my block inked up. I'm going to try and center it on the paper. Actually, I'm thinking here, let's just put it on the base of your printing press first. Then center your paper. Okay, notice how the paper is sitting all the way to this edge of the press. You need to be able to push it all the way back there because that's where the top of this is going to press down. Okay, so just gently scoot your paper back. Okay. Now your block has to be facing down and your paper is touching kind of this foam part, okay? Because what's going to happen is when this comes down, it applies pressure, and just like how this baren is kind of squishy, this is going to act as the squishy portion to be able to help push that ink onto your paper from the block. Okay, so it's pretty simple. Gently kind of, you have to encourage this bar, this plate here, to move down flat. Once it's touching your plate, then you're going to, you could put one hand over here to support it so it doesn't slide on you, and your other hand here to press down. Now it does take a little bit of pressure, but don't press too hard. Okay. So I'm slowly going to lift that up. Whoop. It's a little bit stiff because it's brand new. All right, and you can slide your paper out. This time you can just remove your block instead of the paper, but very slowly. Okay, so I got a decent transfer there. There's little speckles in the black here, so I'll try another one. All right, I was finally able to get a nice, crisp, solid black. So this is what you're going for your prints as well. So keep trying to make attempts. I know it takes a lot of ink. The ink actually does start drying out too the longer it sits out. So if you roll up your block and decide, oh, I don't have my paper, I don't have a baren, I don't have the press, you need to make sure that you're ready, okay? One other important thing that I forgot to mention, when printing, it's just become natural for me. When I set my roller down, I don't set it on the rubber here. I set it on the back side. I'm sure you can think of why I would do that, but I'll tell you. It's so you don't just get ink on any other surface where you would set it down, and over time, if you use that roller a lot, it can slowly push in on the roller and kind of dent it because it is rubber. For cleanup, you're going to take your plastic palette knife and you're going to try and scoop up as much of this ink as you can. If there's still a lot, we can try and save it and put it in one of those little plastic containers. But like what I have here is really not very much at all. So I am just going to throw away what I have. All right, seems like I'm just making a mess, but I am scooping up some on the palette knife. You can smear this on a paper towel, or maybe you had like some scrap prints where we just use the computer paper. You can smear it onto that as well. Try to just wipe it all off. Then before you put it in the trash, just fold it so that way it doesn't have to get on everything else. Okay, and then you're going to take your plastic plate, plastic palette knife, and the brayer, and you're going to go to the sink. You can wash these with soap and water, but I'll show you, it does come out. So when you're at the sink and cleaning this, make sure you take it off of the plastic handle so that way you can get all of these edges really clean. If there's ink on any of these brayers, we're going to send you back to the sink to clean them up, so do a good job the first time around. Remember, that's part of your grade, is taking good care of the materials and making sure they're clean. I wanted to show you how clean everything is after I have finished cleaning it with soap and water. The roller you can just pop right back into place. You should dry this off with a paper towel just to make sure you've wiped all the edges and gotten any extra ink. It might kind of dye the roller itself, but I can tell that there's no ink left on the surface. Same with the sides of your palette knives. Shouldn't be any ink there, but again, use your paper towel, wipe it clean or wipe it dry. And the acrylic plate as well, it's clean. One thing I would like to mention for cleaning, if you kind of back it up a little bit, pretend this has ink on it, you can take a plain piece of paper and kind of roll that ink on there just to take some of it off the roller before you take it to the sink. That'll help alleviate some of the time. With your block, as far as cleaning your block, when you're done, I'm going to basically just print it again. Put just a plain piece of paper. This is actually what's called a ghost print. Some people do intentional prints like this just because they look lighter. But I'm going to do that a couple times just to clean off the ink as much as possible. So I would do this probably 3 times just to make sure you've got as much ink off of there as possible. And then when you set your block in your cubby, make sure you set it so that way the image is up so you don't get ink on anything else in your cubby. A couple more things I wanted to mention. Cleanup by yourself will take about 10 to 15 minutes. So I suggest pairing up 2 or 3 people, and that way you can kind of take turns cleaning the materials. So maybe you trade off using the brayer and your acrylic plate just to save on some cleanup time. If there's something like 20 minutes left in class, you've just finished carving, you want to start printing, that's not very realistic. So you have to keep in mind your time usage and be prepared when you come to class if you want to start printing that day to get set up right away to get started.